Hi, everyone. Welcome to our portion. You know, Ashwin and I, we thought we were the celebrity panel, so it was a little awkward earlier. We saw we had competition. So my name is Emily Withrow. I am faculty here at Northwestern as well. Right now I'm on leave. I'm the editor of the Quartz bot studio, which is sort of an experimental startup studio within Quartz, which is part of Atlantic Media. So we're running all kinds of experiments and doing research and launching products to try to understand where news and information and storytelling sort of fit in some of these emerging technologies.
Okay, and I'm Ashwin Ram. I'm with Amazon Alexa. I am part of the science team. I do research with conversational AI, trying to get Alexa to be more conversational. And one of the things we're working on is some more conversational interactive news experiences, which we'll talk about a little bit. So this panel is interesting in that there is no moderator, so we'll do it more as a fireside chat. And we'll have plenty of time. I've noticed that in most of the sessions, there are more hands up than we have time for. So we'll give all of you plenty of time to jump in with discussion. So I thought what we do is to start, just sort of level the playing field by defining what a conversational interface is. I've noticed a lot of people sort of think of conversational interfaces as speech recognition, right? So you can bring up your computer or your phone or your favorite app, and then sort of typing on your keyboard or on a virtual keyboard, you can speak the words you would like it to type, and it types them out for you. Right? And so that's the speech recognition part, works pretty well. But that's not a conversational interface to the app. That's just a conversational interface to your typewriter. The rest of the app still has to be operated by you in your usual way. So for example, if we decided we wanted to go downtown tonight after the reception and maybe see the city, and we're trying to figure out what the weather is like and whether we should take an umbrella along because it might rain, I could pull out a phone app for weather or go to a website and start searching for Chicago. I would type in the words. I could speak it out with my virtual typewriter. And then something comes up and I have to figure out where the precipitation information is and scroll to the right time of day. And so I'm still operating the app with the voice just being a sort of a shortcut for typing, right? Or I could just say, Alexa, do I need an umbrella in Chicago tonight? Assuming the internet is up. Let me try that again. Alexa, do I need an umbrella in Chicago tonight?
It might rain in Chicago, Illinois tonight. There's a 66% chance. You can expect about 0.25 inches.
So I didn't actually even ask about rain or the weather. I just said, do I need an umbrella? It's exactly the same question I might ask if I was asking Larry, hey, should I take my umbrella along? Right, so that's a conversational interface. It's an interface to a complicated application, in this case the weather application, that normally you have to drive, but in this case, you can just converse with it like you might with another human. One thing interesting about this device is there's no user interface on it. There aren't buttons and screens and so forth, other than the mute button if you want to not listen to you. So a true conversational interface is one where the entire interaction happens through a natural voice conversation, just like it does with humans. And so the question then becomes, what does it mean to have a conversational news experience? So for years, if you think about the way we consume news, a lot of you produce news, but for the rest of us who consume news, it's very passive. I'm reading something that you've written, or I'm listening to the radio, or I'm watching news on television or on YouTube nowadays or whatever. It's very passive. I'm just sort of consuming with no interaction, no interactivity. But could we talk about news? Could we get involved with and engaged in a more interactive way with news? What would that even mean? So let's have maybe Emily ask that question. Emily's done some research at Northwestern and then now at Quartz as well, on different kinds of ways in which people might interact with news conversationally. So what kinds of work have you done and what have you learned?
Oh, so much, really. One of the things I think that we asked from the very beginning, it's a really exciting space. For me, what the potential really is that when we think about social media, we think about this sort of one-to-many model, right? You put your thing out there, at least publishers do. You put your thing out there and you hope that it is spread far and wide. The chat space is really just super different because you are having one-on-one interactions, but at great scale. And so the feel of it is completely different. What you're doing there is completely different, and it's private, it's more intimate. And so we started thinking about how news and information would fit into that space. Could we have a more interactive version of the news, and more important perhaps, would anybody actually even want that, right? If you could talk back to NPR, would you do it? Maybe, maybe not. So we designed a couple of experiments. I started doing this a couple years ago in the Night Lab, and then have since sort of jumped to Quartz to have a larger audience to play with for the bots that we are building. But the first thing that we tried was this idea sort of a news concierge, and we built it around sort of inspiration from the water cooler type situations that we would have about the news, where you would walk in and say, to your colleague perhaps, oh God, did you hear about that Uber driver that killed those people in Michigan, right? And based on the reaction of the person you're talking to, you talk at a different level, right? You change your delivery of the story based on whether or not the person has heard the story, whether they've heard the latest details. And so we built something for this device, which I won't use her name because she will come to life. We built something here and tested what people would say in response to the headlines. And I can share some of that with you guys later. I'll pop up a demo. But we did this model of telling you a headline, and then we recorded all of the questions that people would ask in response to a headline, and whether or not they would, and what types of stories they would actually respond to. And what we found was that with proper guidance, if it was really relying on the type of the writing, the type of delivery for the headline. If the headline was written in sort of a user-friendly way, very chatty, very approachable, with certain keywords kind of emphasized, then people felt very comfortable following up. They didn't always follow up though, right? And I think we do this online. You read the headline sometimes and you choose not to read the story, and that's fine. We generally saw that people tended to engage more with stories that involved violence in some way, and stories, so some sort of element of danger, or if the story was sort of a true curiosity story. And that finding led me to do my next design at Quartz, where it was purely sort of curiosity stories. So they were all global. We were trying to fight that idea that you see the same story everywhere you go, and maybe you don't need then to get your news from this conversational thing because it's telling you the same thing as everyone else. So we did global stories with some curiosity angle, and we made the delivery more fun. We put it into sort of a quiz format, but not in the sort of competitive news quiz way you might encounter elsewhere. The questions were kind of funny, and they were all stories we assume you haven't heard, and so also the possible answers were funny. And that tested far, far better than our original design, really I think because of the stories that we were choosing, and the way that we were writing them. Interestingly, perhaps, we did A/B testing where we built one using Alexa's voice and one using my voice. So one was this, the exact same script delivered, one by a human, one by Alexa, and we videotaped them, and people reported that they liked the voice delivery better, but they emoted more when listening to Alexa. So the reporting was really far different from visible smiles and laughing, and if we had it muted, you absolutely would have said these people are enjoying this experience far, far more than this other experience. But what they reported back was quite different. So I'm sort of curious to hear your reaction to that. How people must be emotional and have reactions when talking to Alexa sometimes.
Yeah, I think part of the if I can use the word magic there for Alexa, has been the fact that people don't think of Alexa as a device or a tool or a piece of technology. She's typically not visible sitting in front of you on a table. She's in the corner of your kitchen, and you can talk to her whenever you want, just like you might to another person. And so people do report to us that they refer to her as she, and they say she's like a friend or like a family member. We've had people send us pictures of Christmas gifts that they bought for Alexa along with Chris for their family. So people do develop a relationship with Alexa. I think part of it is also, I think the difference with the human is that Alexa is not trying to pretend that she's human. She's got a nice voice, but it's not human. It's clear that it's not human. And so we're trying to stay away from this uncanny valley situation that I'm sure folks are familiar with, where if something gets too human-like and pretends to be human when it's clearly not, people have an adverse reaction to it. So for news, I think what's interesting is that we started on a project in my group, which we call the Alexa Prize, and actually Shailesh, who spoke this morning from Washington Post, was a key partner in this. He gave access to the news databases and the comments and so forth from Washington Post to our group to make these available to universities who were competing for something we call the Alexa Prize. So this was a competition, is going on right now, for university students to create a conversational skill for Alexa that will allow you to chat about the news. And in a way you might with a friend. So it would be sports, politics, technology, movies, celebrities, fashion, Oscars, whatever. And so we have 16 teams in the competition, and these teams are ingesting the daily news from Washington Post and any other free sources they can get their hands on, like the AP Newswires and so forth. And their people are conversing with these bots. So the way that it works is you say, Alexa, let's chat. We connect you randomly to one of these 16 teams, and you have a conversation with their bot. Initially, they were not that great. They're getting better because of all of the interactions and feedback that all of you are giving these bots. We've just down selected to 3 finalists who will be baking off next month for a $500,000 prize. And then we'll run this next year as well. I hope there will be entries from these groups, because you clearly have both the journalism side and the technology side to attack this problem. But back to your question then, I think the relationship here is that there's a safety issue in sort of exploring questions that you might want to ask. You're more forgiving of mistakes the device makes because, and she will make mistakes, because you sort of know its technology. And you're also, I think, a little more open to exposing your own ignorance and asking a question that you might not of another person who say, wait, you didn't know that? So I think there's a comfort level there in interacting with devices that you might not get other than with very close friends, for example.
Yeah, I think the uncanny valley is really interesting. So, Quartz has an app that's written in a conversational flow. It delivers these text bubbles. We do several updates a day, but it is a team of humans who are writing, and they say, well, we are humans pretending to be robots, pretending to be humans, and that's the voice. And I think, as we move toward true automation of some of these pieces, I think it's important to think about the balance of that personality. I think personality can be really helpful. Sometimes it can form those relationships. I think one thing that we do in our conversational design is in that validation of what the user says. If I say, oh man, my cousin passed away, you wouldn't say, here's a pamphlet on grief, right? You would, I hope, say, I'm sorry to hear that. I have some information that might help, right? But as we're humans, we really try to validate each other and then offer information. And in our conversational design, that's something that we're really looking at and using natural language processing to say, what does this sentiment look like, and then routing to the appropriate response before routing to the content. So the uncanny valley, do you think that there are places where personality can be a detractor or inhibit interaction?
Yeah, it can be. So we have at Alexa a personality team who owns the personality of Alexa, and her entire personality, not just the voice and inflections, but also the kinds of things she says and how she says them, have been sort of designed to have a particular personality. People report that she has her own kind of quirky sense of humor. But of course, with tens of millions of people using this thing, we want to make sure we don't offend people either. So it can't be too edgy and too opinionated. And so I think the personality is a really critical factor in acceptance of these kinds of technologies. Now, one thing that's interesting is that it's harder to get personality if the conversational interface you have is text-based as opposed to voice-based. And so we know people do chat about news with each other when they post on the comment section of a news story on a website, or out on Twitter and Reddit and other places. They're conversing with each other, but not necessarily with the news source or the editors or the authors or the people involved in the news stories. I know you've done some experiments with looking at text-based bots versus voice-based bots and how people interact. What kinds of differences do you see in the interactions and the engagement you get with these types of modalities?
Okay, so there are lots of things that sort of separate these two spaces. One is the obvious. One is actually visual. You have text to look at. You can scan text in a way that you can't scan audio. And so the interaction tends to be much faster paced, and you have to plan for that. You additionally, you talk about personality in text form. At Quartz, we're using tons of emojis and GIFs to supplement plain text, to try to emote properly or to give an immediate feel of those messages as they come in. It can backfire in certain situations where you're reporting on serious issues. We have to sort of pull back, and have gotten in trouble a couple of times for using offensive emoji, perhaps. But the design, again, I think is completely different, because when you're writing for voice delivery, you're really writing as people speak. When you write for text, you're really writing for text for people to read things. But I love talking to designers and visual designers, especially about mood boards that they create, and we have taken to creating mood boards for these invisible design situations as well. We've looked at oral tradition, which has this sort of call and response where you would tell a story, and you have these hooks in oral tradition where you're asking your audience to say, are you still with me? We're here. We're thinking about that. We're also thinking about sort of the FAQ or Q&A space where you're aware that the writer is writing the questions as well. That's always been a favorite form of mine, and we're trying to pull in pieces of that. The ability, I think, too, of people to type makes it much faster for people to try to test your bot, and this is something that we know happens immediately, is you give people a space where they can type, and they will just throw just about anything in your direction. It's harder, I think, just because of the pacing of the automated home devices, where you have to say that out loud. Maybe it feels more aggressive than typing something. But we've seen a lot of people test our bot repeatedly and sort of type things. And I think whether or not and how to respond to what people say to you is also tough to handle in text form.
We get that with voice as well, although you're right, that's, I think speaking it aloud makes people a little more inhibited with respect to what they might say.
Yeah. Good. So let's switch a bit to the technical side of things. Well, how would you describe the sort of technical state of affairs of conversational design?
So if you think about sort of how Alexa or any device in this genre works, right? There are basically sort of 4 stages involved in the interaction between the umbrella question and the answer I got, right? The first is for the device to understand the sound waves that hit it, and turn those into text as if you typed it. That's called speech recognition or automatic speech recognition. The second stage is to figure out what you meant when you said it. So when I asked if I need an umbrella, what I really meant was, is it going to rain? But I didn't say that. People don't talk, like that. They assume that there's shared knowledge that lets you infer the real meaning of the sentence. The third step is then figuring out what an appropriate response is. So if having understood that I'm asking about the weather, what part of the whole weather forecast which might you say back, and that has to be very succinct, because people will, as you said, scan text or a web page and quickly pick out that little icon in the corner with the rain symbol. But with voice, you can't do that. You have to hit it on the nose. And then the final step is rendering that answer back in language, in conversational speech, in a way that sounds pleasant to the human ear. And not too robotic, and particularly if the answers are long, if you're talking about the news or reading out a piece of news and you have this sort of long-form text, people get tired of little robotic inconsistencies in intonation very quickly. So those are kind of the steps you go through. These are all hard problems. Speech recognition is, I won't call it solved, but it's pretty darn good. You can, if you buy an Alexa device, you don't have to voice train it against your voice. She can understand you even if there are other people talking in the room and there's music playing and so forth. The language understanding is harder. In order to really understand what you mean, you do have to take into account some amount of shared knowledge. You have to figure out sometimes what people already know and what you might be referring to. So those problems are still under research, although the state of the art is pretty good there as well. The response generation is a wide open problem, and that's actually what the Alexa Prize focuses on. So even if I gave you ground truth on what the person was asking about, what is an appropriate response to that? If it's question and answer, it's a little bit easier. There's maybe a right answer out there if that I could find and give back to you. But if you're chatting about news or any other kind of social topic, there's not always a right answer. I might ask an opinion about something. I might ask, how did you know that? Or I might ask, tell me a little more about so-and-so or thus and thus. And now you're getting into this problem of knowing what I already know, because you don't want to repeat the obvious, and so tailoring a response to that. The amount of depth and the level of interest I might have in a topic is quite different from, say, yours. And so we have to personalize. We have to carry the context along. We not only have to resolve an AFRA. If I said, if, for example, I just asked about Chicago, and if my next question was, how about Milwaukee? Presumably, I still mean, is it going to rain in Milwaukee? So that kind of anaphoric references can be carried along, and we know how to do that. But there are other deeper contextual cues that need to be carried along. You may, for example, infer my political leanings or my level of interest or my level of knowledge about something from a part of a conversation and have to carry that over. How do we do that in general? So these are all some very hard problems that are really unsolved in the artificial intelligence literature and the cognitive science literature. And one of the things that makes it hard is that it's not purely an AI problem. It's also sort of a human problem. It's a cognitive science or psychology problem as well, because it's about understanding humans and how humans think and humans infer, and not just about getting the computer to do the task well. And if you have a program that plays a board game like chess or Go, it doesn't really matter if it plays it in a human-like way or understands my rationale or strategy at all. It just has to play this super fast, blindingly fast, search all the moves and get the answer. You can't do that for a conversation. And so this really is a hard problem that needs so many different disciplinary focuses and perspectives to solve. And then finally, the speech generation at the end is again pretty good. So there's sort of two extremes, the recognition and generation are almost there. I mean, they can still be improved, and some of the intonations and prosody, et cetera, can be improved. But the hard problem is in the middle. And there, I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks to come together from different disciplines and really start to engage and figure out how we might solve these kinds of problems.
Yeah, this is exactly, I think, what we're struggling with, albeit in a very different setting, every day when we're trying to tell stories here, because when, as soon as it's fairly self-contained if you use buttons, that's fine. It's the easiest way to do if you're doing text interface, just to offer people some options. But if you don't, if you choose to allow them to respond back, we found that we could really control what people will say back based on the limited amount of information we give them up front. But then, as soon as they ask a question and you respond, there's another layer there. And so they will either ask a follow-up question or a question about the original material. And you can see how, as you try to go down the path, it gets more and more unmanageable and harder to predict and harder to understand which part of what people are referring to, that sort of contextual problem. I'm happy too to demo, as I know a lot of this is hard to follow, but I have a demo that sort of runs both sides from brushing on my mic. Let's see here. Let me log in. Okay, there we go. Okay, so first of all, disclaimers. This is my work account. I talk to bots all day long, and you will see that I have been chatting with a Christian Grey chatbot. It's actually quite clever. It's well written in the art of just completely ignoring whatever the user says and then just saying something back to you that makes you uncomfortable. So I highly recommend you can go and chat with him yourself. But this is a demo that I actually built for people in the Quartz newsroom, because it's really hard to try to tell. It's just hard to talk about what a bot is or what a chatbot is, or to demonstrate any sort of storytelling without showing people what they're doing. And so I built a demo bot. It is a story about Beyonce, because I figured if bots had any desire, they probably would want to talk about Beyonce. So
and can you make the font bigger or bigger?
I have been struggling with that. Well, I know that. But if I do that, I start to lose. Okay, here we go. Is that better for you guys? Okay, cool. So this is the notification. I'm going to be quiet and just kind of navigate, let you guys read. But the first part of this is the button demo, so sort of walking people through an experience, and then I'll tell you when the open response starts to come. Okay, so that's the demo of the button style. And then this particular bot, I wouldn't actually type this. This is my secret way to get to a follow-up that, so thank you. That 30 seconds? Minutes, all right. I was like, oh no. So this is what I would type just in testing to show you what the bot would automatically follow up with you. So if you had said, yeah, I want to still talk about this, or in any case, we would follow up with you at some time later, and we would say this. Okay, so that's the demo. But so what we're doing here is a little bit smoke and mirrors. But we built this in ReveScript, which is a scripting language for bots, and we then run calls to API.ai, which has now rebranded as Dialog Flow. Thank you, Google. To essentially say, like, okay, at this point, we're asking a question that generally will read yes and no. Can you tell us whether, can you translate whatever the person types into yes or no, and then we know sort of which pedal to push. And when I say it's smoke and mirrors, it's, typically the form kind of goes like this, because we have the content that's written, but we want to acknowledge what you said in some way. And so you will respond, we will give you a brief little acknowledgement of what you said, like a totally or what, or whatever we're going to say back to you, and then route you to the actual content. So it's just these little kind of loops that go back and forth. And we can do that for yes, no, or sentiment, or anything. But what we're trying to really understand, and the way that we're trying to control it right now, is just on a level that we can determine whether or not people are screwing with us or not. Whether or not we say, do you like broccoli, if they're going to say like yes, no, or if they say Hong Kong, right? We're trying to say, are you on topic or are you off topic? And if they're off topic, are they saying something that's relative to the other universe of this bot? Are they referring to something that we wrote about yesterday? Are they saying help? Do we have something that we can offer? Or is this really someone being truly off topic? But so that's the kind of thing that the experiences that we're trying to build is to weave, or maybe do this dance between, using NLP kind of like a crutch in our storytelling to lead us along the right, to allow us to create a more tailored path. But
And all these paths and the branches have been sort of authored, and then you're sort of on the fly finding me a nice path through them. But
Yes.
it's sort of a giant
Currently-
dialogue tree.
yes, currently everything is authored. Our sort of V2, I think, once we get off the ground, we're launching something very soon. And our V2, we're going to play the game of having automatically created content, but much like the Target coupons that you receive in the mail, we're not totally going to tell you which ones are written perhaps by not us and which are. And by Target coupons, I mean, you get your coupon book and 3 of them are really targeted at you, and the other ones are red herrings to make you feel okay about yourself. And that you're not being targeted. And that's how we're going to handle it initially, to understand, is there a difference of engagement between sort of the crafted editorial voice and a different version of our editorial voice.
That's interesting. So they're basically, back to the technology question, there's sort of 3 classes of technologies that are used to create these kinds of experiences, whether they're text-based or voice-based. And actually, if you interact with the Alexa Price bots, you'll be able to pick up on all of these as they occur. One is a variant of this, where you create through rules or dialogue trees a set of experiences that are largely scripted with some flexibility to give the user some degree of autonomy and control over the paths they might follow. But you've sort of curated and designed an experience for them. A second genre of bots is one where you typically, through very large-scale data and machine learning, train a bot with a ton of data, a ton of different interactions. And the bot then, in a new interaction, finds a good prior case where it can then replay what it knows might work, or thinks might work, because it's seen that before. So that's an example of where you might see, millions of conversations like this, which you can now do at internet scale. And now this of all of the different responses and paths have already been ingested into the database, and the machine learning system then says, okay, based on this, here's a good next response back to the user. And if the data that you're ingesting is sound, and is from a good source, you're pretty likely to hit a response that would be reasonable in that scenario. And the third generation, which is sort of a newest form of technology, is what's called generative models, where you have these bots maybe trained up with lots of prior examples, but then they're creating a response on the fly for you by putting together little pieces of things from what is seen into an entirely novel sentence or paragraph that it has created on the fly, which of course is much closer to what we do when we speak to each other. And so that, as you can see, the technology is much more ready for prime time. The first genre of experiences, kind of getting there for the middle genre, if you do have all of the training data you need, and still wide open on the third genre to really craft on-the-fly responses. You can do that reasonably well in a certain number of situations, but to really just chat about the news in a way that doesn't get tripped up constantly is still a very hard problem. So you'll see that generative models, even though they're sort of the holy grail in this area, are still quite far from being ready for prime time. But certainly very ripe for research. The tools are out there, the data is out there. And there's a lot of prior art on which you can experiment and improve if you wanted to try that.
So on a tactical level, what are your next steps? You've done the Alexa Prize. What specific problem are you guys going to be looking at next?
So with respect to the Alexa Prize, we're going to run this competition again next year. And we've set a bar. There's actually $1 million prize if you can meet the bar that we've set, which is to chat coherently and engagingly, and both parts are important, with humans about news type topics or things that are sort of current popular topics for 20 minutes, which is actually quite hard. It's actually even hard for humans to do that. And by coherently, I mean you're not just sort of changing topics all the time. Engagingly, it's not just Q&A or sort of scripted responses. It really it needs to be a conversation. And I think we're quite far from solving that problem to the level where you could meet a grand challenge like this. So for the Alexa Prize, we're going to do it again next year. We're going to take all of the learnings from this year, a lot of the tools that my team built that supported the competition, and make those available, ingest some of the learnings and make all of that available to next year's teams so that they have a higher baseline to build on and can get even better and better and better. From Alexa as a whole, outside of the news experience, if you think about what Alexa and other technologies in that space do well, they're very good at transactional interactions, point Q&A. Right? One step, ask a question, I get an answer. I just ask about the weather, yes, it's clever, but I still got one answer, I'm done. I give it a request, I can order pizza or get an Uber or whatever. I don't have to sort of figure out how to use an app, but it's still a point transactional interaction. How do we get these things to be more conversational with respect to other kinds of things? Could Alexa help me figure out what music I should play when I have a bunch of friends over, what movie I should watch? Or help me plan a vacation, or things where there isn't a one-step Q&A, but where there's a whole conversation involved in sort of figuring out what I want and what the right solution for me might be. And that's more in a utilitarian or functional goal-directed scenario. And also in just entertainment. A lot of people want to chat with Alexa. What would it mean for you to get home sort of weary after a day's worth of work and just chat with Alexa while you're making dinner? What would that conversation be? It might be about the news, it might not. It might just be about your day at work, it might be about whatever. So how do we create a more conversational experience around the use of virtual agents in all facets of life, so beyond news? So that's what Alexa's team is going after more broadly. But we heard a little bit from Shailesh this morning about Jeff Bezos' thinking on this. We're very focused on sort of solving problems with the big picture in mind, but problems that we can bite off and solve in contained applications, contained periods of time, and then iterating on that. And so tackling things like Alexa Prize gives us a solid kind of MVP, if you will, minimal viable product from which we can then iterate and broaden to other domains.
It was 20 minutes arbitrary.
I think actually that's an overestimate, but you can go as long as you need to.
No, but 20 minutes is the prize.
Oh, yeah, got it.
Yeah, 20 minutes is also the time we have for questions,
Got
which
it.
is.
Yes.
But
Yeah, exactly. Here we go.
20,
I'm dumber than Alexa.
20 minutes was. We ran a lot of user studies. We did two things. We ran a lot of user studies to see what might be interesting for people and how you might engage. 20 minutes is sort of typical for, say, NPR talk show, which is a 30-minute segment with breaks. That tends to be the chunk that people like. And 20 minutes was also about 10x the state of the art right now in conversational AI tools, interactive storytelling tools. There are systems out there that could sort of interact with you and tell a story with you or talk with you for about a minute or two about something. So we felt that 20 minutes was a grand enough challenge. It was 10x. Now, if someone cracks it this year, would be delighted, and we'll come up with a harder one next year to go after.
Cool. So we'll open up for questions.
Yeah, we'd love to get questions and some thoughts from all of you.
Over here.
I'm going to run around with the mic.
So you mentioned using Alexa or speech artificial intelligence for news, but I'm curious if there's any work being done on, for instance, Wikipedia or encyclopedias this may just me kind of being a geek, but I would like to be able to conversate with Wikipedia, and I know that there's certain knowledge bases such as Wikidata that one could leverage. So like, I would say, Wikipedia, can you read me this article? And then maybe I would have a follow-up question. I think that'd be interesting for gaining new knowledge. So is there anything being done about that?
So there, you can talk to Wikipedia through Alexa. You can say, Alexa, ask Wikipedia who was John Lennon or whatever, and have a conversation about that. Alexa also ingests content from Wikipedia, so if you just ask Alexa a question directly, you might get something out of Wikipedia in response to that. The ongoing conversation is still limited by the technology for conversational AI. There's only a certain level of context tracking and personalization we can do thus far. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you were chatting about something from Wikipedia and are trying to dig deeper, to make it interesting and useful for you, we'd want to understand what you know already and where to help you and how deep to go. And some of those tools are still being developed.
So I had a question just going back to, we think a lot about like social news feeds. They have this kind of nice property of having these kind of serendipitous kinds of interactions, and someone just posts something funny on Twitter and you didn't subscribe to that or expect that, but it appears there and you still have an enjoyable experience because of that. But then when we think about designing those kinds of experiences for these kinds of conversational agents and interfaces, how do we sort of design serendipity into these systems? We want to be able to skim things, we want to be able to sort of have, we think of like, an NPR podcast as this very sort of polished, curated, sort of just like well-honed thing that we know that we're signing up for this like great 40-minute experience. But how do we think about designing serendipity or fun, unexpected things into these conversational interfaces?
So we have a lot of, frankly, sort of silly ideas in this wheelhouse, because we love that about the internet. And I think, Quartz especially, and I think you feel this in the editorial product, is we are people who are on the internet all the time and love it, and so is our audience. And so, part of this is, so one thing that we've been thinking about is dispatches, basically, and playing with push notifications in a way that, if my friend who knows me well sees something that he or she likes, they'll send me that just in a text, and that's all it is. It's just a link, it's just an image, just a thing, right? And so we're thinking about that as part of our push strategy, is that we're not here to explain everything to you or why we think something is interesting, but that part of what we're doing is just sort of giving you stuff at random. And the other thing that I built, which I love, I don't know if it'll actually be part of what we launch, is just like it's almost like what's the right analogy? A pet can go over to a feeder and like hit a thing and more kibble comes out. I have built that into most of the bots I have made, sort of like this chat version of what used to be Stumbled Upon or Dig or something, something that just kind of throws you candy every time you hit it. And so that's sort of the serendipity that we've built into our bots, because we want them to be fun and we want them to be curated. So we've looked at pulling those links from our Slack, for example. Our Slack is a really fun place where people will post things, the best of the internet from the day. And so that's how we're trying to feed sort of that database of links.
Take a couple more questions and then we'll take.
Hi, so this way of news consumption, as you said, is very intimate, private, and eventually people may develop emotional connections to these devices. And I wonder what would be the implications for that for news consumers. I mean, because this news comes from the device you love, you like, you have emotional attachment to, you're more likely to trust those news. Or people may, I don't know, care about news that comes from Alexa, and they don't care about, they lose where those news come from. I mean, whether it's NPR, Washington Post, they don't know the sources, but they just care about, Alexa, who they have some connection to. So I just wonder the implications of this, way of news consumption for average news consumers.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question. I would argue that most readers of Quartz probably already have some kind of emotional relationship with the brand already. They have opinions and feelings and what they expect from the brand and what they don't. I think you guys probably have a much harder, much steeper hill to climb in this arena because you aren't a news-specific company. You do so many things, and so it's harder, I think, for you guys to probably get news in a neutral way. I'm just gonna speculate, and then you can tell me whether or not I'm right. But I have an Amazon Show, which is the sort of Echo that has a TV screen on it, right? And the news that appears there so far is celebrity birthdays, celebrity deaths. It's like the celebrity, birthday and death beat. And then sort of off-topic weird news. And my theory has been that you don't want to surprise people with political coverage or sort of have that be in the ambient screen. But maybe you can talk a little bit about what news you're choosing to deliver.
Yeah, so there's sort of two parts to that, right? With something like a device like this, news is delivered in response to a request by the user. So I might just, I might ask for news. What's the latest with the North Korea situation or the California wildfires? I might just say, Alexa, what's up? And Alexa will tell me what's up. And in the case of the Echo Show and other devices like that, news is being sort of pushed to you without asking. And so at that point, if you push something political, for example, or edgy or whatever, that might be more inappropriate. You might have kids around. You just don't know who's looking, right? So it's a very different kind of experience. But with this as well, there's another tricky situation here, which is the attribution of the news. So if you say, Alexa, what's my flash briefing, which is one way you get sort of short, longer, but still short news snippets from, as compared to What's Up, which is a very short news snippet. If you say, Alexa, what's my flash briefing, Alexa will then tell you, from NPR or from Washington Post or from New York Times, you can set whatever your favorite news sources are. At that point, it's NPR delivering the news to you, not Alexa. Alexa is just the channel it comes on. But if Alexa were to just read you a headline, would that be news from Alexa, or is that still news from NPR? And what's that balance like? And you clearly want to attribute news to the source, but you also don't want to be too distracting. Again, in a voice experience, you can't just have a little footer that says where it's from. It takes time. It takes mental bandwidth to hear this. And so we're always sort of trying to balance what would be a good experience for a voice user. And we actually have teams of experts on voice user interface design, which is quite a different beast from user interface design.
But to your point, the emotion is really hard, and I think we talk about personality, but you have to think about the content that you're delivering too. And one of the tests that we did, we wrote a story about, it was like a terrible thing in which baby animals were all dying. It was like all baby seals are dead, or some story that was about dead baby animals. And to hear a sort of robotic voice, kind of like chipper, tell you that, almost all of the people in our user testing were like, oh no, it was this exaggerated reaction. I think part of it was the delivery, right? That it wasn't sort of that muted tone that you use when you're doing hard news. It was, it was the same. You have no sort of control over that. I mean, you can go in and tinker with it, but it's hard when you're automating it.
Just, you want to take one more?
One more?
Yeah, one more question.
Hi.
So are Alexa's users concerned about the sources used by Alexa? Are people concerned?
So there's, we give the users choice in the news sources. I assume you're asking particularly about the news. So when you configure your Alexa, you select your favorite news sources, and we'll curate news from that for you. In general, though, I think people seem to be happy with having some level of choice. But again, with any device that doesn't have an interface or any piece of technology, really, you don't want to spend a lot of time configuring it. You just want it to work. And so there's sort of this tension between us sort of figuring out a good selection for you, and sometimes it results in what you see on the Echo Show, and allowing you to go in and configure it for yourself. But yeah, I think for news, people are concerned about the news sources. That people have their sort of loyal providers, and there is a lot of loyalty. There's and I think one of the things I really liked from this morning's panel with the fact checker example, right, was to have Alexa be a source not of the news but of checking the news for you, right? And that point, and as in the demo we saw, Alexa then tells you whether she thinks this news is true or false, but attributes that to, according to such and such source, the following thing was reported to be not true, so that it's clear to you. You may or may not like the choice of source, but at least it's clear to you why we are saying this. So I think transparency is key.
It seems like a really great place to end. Transparency is all about. So thank you, Emily and Asha.